fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. I've got a couple of strangers here. It's been a while since we've all been together, but Mr. Joe Goldberg and Mr. Gavin Stone are kind of in the room.
The world didn't want us together too much, so they banned the amount of times we could actually be in the same podcast.
Yeah.
I'm trying to limit the complaints for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen. It's outrageous how many. I mean, the Gavin Stone complaints, I just can't believe.
Well, those I understand.
Yeah.
They've got their own folder, right?
Yeah. You see Gavin, do you see him in Greece? Like, what's that all about?
I was over in Crete, actually, and I flew over from Crete to Greece to go and meet Jonas Saul.
Oh, so you wrote that whole thing off, didn't you? As a writing thing, even though, I mean, I saw no writing there.
That's it. It was just put down as an expense for the taxman, maybe.
Yeah. and my God, beach, all that stuff. Nice.
The life
nice.
of a writer who's doing his research for the next book.
Yeah. And so was Joe. Joe went to the Kansas concert.
I went to the Kansas guy. It was great. Reliving my youth. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
That's great.
And that's a long time ago, and not the original band anymore, I guess, eh?
There's one, the guitar player, Rich Williams was there, which was a standing ovation, and Phil Earhart, and nobody knows I think he's sick, he's taking time off, but there's kind of two, but Rich Williams has played the entire time, so, I mean, I like Kansas, sorry. Everybody's shutting the place off now. You're losing.
No, actually, that's not true, because most of them will go, what's Kansas?
What's Kansas? Go look at Kansas. Dust in the wind. Okay, fine, great.
Yeah.
Turn on Wayward Son, fine, great. But when they get into the real music, wow.
Yeah, but that's like 50 plus years, right? So most people.
It's the 50-year tour.
Yeah. So under that, I mean, people under 70 are going to be like, who's that?
I'm under 70. Okay, thank you very much.
I thought I'd see if I could sneak that in.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Well, yeah, it's always a pleasure, Joe.
Do we have a guest here today?
Yes, I was going to say, speaking under 70, we have a guest who's
77th floor, 70th, 7th floor.
Yeah, and he's 7, but 7th floor, not 70th floor. That would be too much. I couldn't climb that many anymore. So we've got, we're going to talk about the book, The 7th Floor. It's a novel, and it's written by David McCloskey. So thank you for being here, David.
Thanks for having me. I'm already taking notes on how to go to concerts and write off the expense for David McCloskey Books LLC for research. So this is even if we don't cover the book, it's already been very useful. So thank you.
I mean, just think, next time you're going to write, you're going to be in Greece.
That's right.
With Gavin, sitting on the beach. Cocktails.
Are there any IRS people listening? Please pay no attention to the justified write-offs that McCloskey's doing.
That's right. I was audited after a podcast appearance. In which...
Yeah. Whatever you do, don't go on that show. You'll end up being audited. You'll end up everything but in jail for that.
Best-selling author to Cell Block C in the blink of an eye.
Right. Yeah, he'll be the 8th Cell. Will be the next book. So listen, what's going on with you? So why are you writing? Is it for the money?
The tax write-offs, obviously. That's why I'm here. I mean, it's a tax shield, the writing business.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. I'm just digging myself further into whatever IRS sort of case investigator, whatever they call themselves, is listening to this is just going to have a field day. I wish I were writing for money. That sounds like it could be even more fun. I mean, it's. I feel like I might be addicted to it. You know, that would be one of the reasons I write, because it's the only thing that I have found myself able to do in this world where I can sit down for 6 to 8 hours and get in flow pretty quickly and relatively easily, and time just disappears. And so if you can do that, you know, you just keep coming back to that experience at its base level. That's why I keep doing this.
But what's the addiction? Like, what is it? Is it something within the words themselves, within the story that you tell? Or is it the process of writing? Like, how can you kind of focus in on what you find to be the addictive quality of it?
So I think the addictive quality is that feeling of sort of flow, right? That flow state. That's a shot in the arm And in particular, I think it's probably been always been a shot in the arm for people who are doing something that they love doing, whether it's writing or, building a fence. But for me, it's about getting into and finding another world, and the creative act of not making, I'm going to pick on my old profession as a consultant here for a second, but I'm not processing a PowerPoint document. I'm participating in a sort of very raw act of going from there was nothing and then there's something. And I think that is a thrilling process, whether that's the creation of a scene, the discovery of a character, right? I mean, I think it makes you feel like you are participating in an act that's bigger than yourself. And when you couple that with, or maybe it's just because of that, you sit down for 6, 7, 8 hours and time flies. That is an energizing. That's the kind of thing where you get up and, go back home or, go into the house after a day of doing that and thinking about how do I get back to that right away. Right. Which is pretty cool.
So with that in mind, going from writing the PDB to now writing kind of spy novels, have you found the whole process therapeutic?
For sure. The PDB, the President's Daily Brief, which is one of the things I wrote when I was at the CIA, is like, it is a highly classified newspaper. It's very anodyne, right? There's no voice in it. There's obviously no character. It's very analytical, right? Very cold, logical, analytical writing. What, why, so what, right? That's basically the structure of every piece. If you were participating in or watching events, like for me, it was the Syrian Civil War, sort of the descent of Syria into madness between, 2011 and 2014. You watch those kind of events and you think, there's real people caught up in this. Like there's emotion to that. There's tragedy to that. There's the best of humanity on display and its worst. And the way I come to terms with stuff like that is by writing. And so I think for me, writing books has been a way to understand, not only just to understand the world and my thoughts about it, but to kind of process the emotion that goes along with those things that I just, you're not able to do that. And for good reason, you're not able to do that when you're writing, as a CIA analyst.
Hey, David, let's stick with this and maybe get a little bit more esoteric. Is that, I just finished my first draft. Thank you very much. Balloons and things. And
Congratulations.
Yes, I'm coming up for air literally yesterday. And so I'm going to get your book and download it tonight and pound off the Audible. People who are writing, I think I fail to have the commitment. And I don't get to the point all the time where it's that 6 to 8 hours a day, nirvana, you're writing. Can you become that? Did you develop that? Or is that something that you had innately for those who want to write, who are trying to get to that euphoric state or state of full commitment that they can sit there for 6 hours?
Well, I will say that is the ideal, right? That's sort of my best day would be one where, it's 6 to 8 hours, hands on keys, 2,000 plus words and rinse and repeat. And there certainly are pockets of the writing season. And I think, you mentioned rushing to kind of getting a first draft done where
right.
I'm really trying to maximize the opportunity or the prospects for that to happen, because I'm just trying to get this thing down on paper with all the, its problems and warts and inconsistencies so I can have something to react to. So that kind of flow state, 6 to 8 hours, tons of words, like it's really, really important that happens in the, creation of the first draft. And there's particular points in kind of the editing process for me where that's necessary too. I will say that in recent years, I'd say maybe the last 2 books in particular, I've really had to force myself. Look, I've got some side projects. I've got 3 kids under 9.
Yeah.
There's just like a lot of stuff.
All the time
on.
in the world. Quit your
right, yeah. And so I've really had to force myself to say like, okay, some days or some pockets of a day, it's like, I'm going to sit down for the next hour on this flight and I am going to do this thing to take ground in the book. And that could be writing 400 words. That could be editing this scene. But to try to take little pockets of time that are not 6 to 8 hours, that adds up if you make a conscious choice to do that every day. By the end of a month, you've got, days and days of extra writing you've gotten in just by taking advantage of these little pockets of time that otherwise, you might not have used as productively. So it's kind of a both and, I think, to your question. Like, you absolutely need time and space to find that flow and to really find the book. Firm belief. You also, depending on the pace you're going for, and I'm trying to do about a book a year, and to maintain quality, as it were, like, you kind of have to grind it out too, and find little spots where you're going to say, like, I don't have any desire to do this, but I've got to sit down and actually put pen to paper here for 45 minutes on this flight, crammed in a middle seat, because if I don't, I make a bunch of these little choices, and at the end of the month, I'm behind.
Yeah, that would be difficult. I could just see you sitting on the plane, and kids are screaming,
right,
and crying, and kicking your seat, and
That's Gavin. That's Gavin.
Yeah.
I'm throwing peanuts.
Coming back from Crete.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was on this flight back from Greece, and this guy was distracting me.
Yeah, and he's totally
But distracting my kids.
Yeah. He's like calling them names and stuff. But your characters, then, how do you create characters for your book? And before we talk about characters, let's talk about the seventh floor. So what's the premise of the seventh floor? What is someone going to get out of this book?
So the seventh floor is it's a modern mole hunt. It is an espionage whodunit. It's a story about the Russians have an asset that they are running inside the upper reaches of Langley on the seventh floor. The seventh floor is the kind of CIA executive suite where the director has their offices. Russians have someone at the highest reaches of the organization. Who is it? That is basically the book. And I bring back a couple characters to this story from book 1 and 2. I've got 3 books out there now. They're not a series, but it's kind of a universe, so these characters overlap. The first one is a woman named Artemis Procter, who is a wonderfully deranged CIA case officer, and she is working with her friend, a fellow CIA case officer named Sam Joseph, and they are presented with incontrovertible proof to their eyes that the Russians have someone inside CIA, and the rest of the book is basically their investigation, which is quite unofficial at times, and involves Procter looking into her own past and really investigating her friends, these kind of group of people who were her dearest friends and most cherished enemies. So it's a story about modern espionage, but it's also a story about friendship, really more than anything, I think. And it's probably also among all my books to this point, the I put the CIA under more of a microscope and try to make this book to some degree an exploration of the modern day CIA, good, bad, and ugly.
So Artemis, who is Artemis Procter? Come on, tell us.
Artemis, oh yeah, who's the inspiration?
There's a real person, yeah, come on.
Yeah, well, in addition to not being audited, one of my goals for coming on this podcast was to not be murdered, and so...
We've got her on the other line right now.
Alana, get on the line. Right?
No, it's not. It's actually not Alana. I did not know Alana. We our paths did not cross when we were inside. It is not Alana Berry. So the inspiration for Procter did begin as a person. And I will take the name and the identity of that person to my grave, because I legitimately do think she would physically injure me were she to find this out. But it's a case officer I worked with, and she started as the inspiration for Procter because for me, the sort of process of discovering a character oftentimes can begin with, I think about someone or a couple people who I knew who were sort of close to this, role or whatever, have similar backgrounds or experience to a character I'm envisioning. And I'll start to kind of clad the character with a few of their attributes, though not all. And what I found with Procter, which is magical when it goes this way, is like within writing even just a few scenes, the initial inspiration for her character, I was no longer thinking of my former colleague as I wrote. It was just like, I'm sort of engaged in this conversation with Artemis Procter, and I'm hearing her voice. So for me, a warning sign that I'm not finding, an authentic character with real voice, oftentimes is if I start with this inspiration of, a friend or a former colleague, and a month down the road, I'm still thinking of them when I write, that's usually a bad sign. And I think it typically, or at least I've interpreted that to mean that I have not found authentic voice for this character, and I'm kind of parroting the voice of one of my colleagues, and that typically doesn't work. I think it doesn't work in fiction, at least for me. So I really try to find that voice as soon as possible in the writing process. And my experience with this has kind of been, there are characters like Procter where really quickly you hear that voice and find it and you're off to the races. And then there's others where it's taken a little bit longer and you have to kind of work over time to discover the voice. And, I think about it a little bit like getting to know a human, right? I mean, there are going to be people who you could just sort of bump into at a coffee shop or wherever, and you're fast friends for whatever reason. There's chemistry. You sort of almost feel like maybe you've known them for a long time, or you just sort of mesh so well. And then there's others who it might take longer to get to know them, but at the end of that, you might have an intimate relationship or friendship or whatever. So, I think with fictional characters, it's kind of, there's a lot of different ways to get there.
Hey, David, now that you've talked about humans, I want to talk about the agency. I wrote an article, I had you as one of the people who actually write the CIA as a character. I actually wrote a Joe Augustine name from the past review of saying the exact same thing, is the importance of the CIA as a character within the book, and therefore how it impacts the way the people inside the agency think and how they react to each other. How important is that to you when you're writing this thing?
Yeah, it's really important. I think that, my general concept is that from, character springs out of setting and plot springs out of character in general. So, you think about a book like The Seventh Floor, which is, a huge amount of it is just taking place at Langley or with people who have spent, 2+ decades inside CIA. Well, they're all going to be formed by that setting, shaped by it, immensely so. Again, in ways that are, good, bad, and ugly. And so for me, it's really important when I'm dealing with setting to try to deal with it as authentically as possible. So, for me, if you say the CIA feels like a character in the book, I mean, I feel like that is a major win, because it means that I've probably gotten some other things right about the actual, the human characters in the novel, and then ultimately the kind of actions that they take. I also just fundamentally think that the CIA is a very misunderstood institution in our society, and that there is a tendency either to treat it like it's full of superheroes or like it's full of villains. And obviously the secrecy doesn't help that. But, and I certainly do not write the books with any kind of attempt at a civic role. I mean, I'm first and foremost trying to entertain readers and propel them through a story. But I think I do hope is kind of a residual that readers will come away feeling like I've humanized the CIA to a degree, and that they have a better understanding of what the place actually is and what it does. Because I do think, my view, it's a flawed but indispensable institution in American society, and we sort of, are ignorant of it at our own peril.
Oh, yeah. Sticking with that theme, because you joined the CIA pretty young, what surprised you the most when you actually made it into Langley and were in full swing, as it were? What was the most surprising thing to you?
I think that I describe the CIA, and I think this might be a little bit hyperbolic, but it makes the point, as like a uniquely bipolar organization. And I think this continues to shock me, and it shocked me when I was a young analyst. Like, you have an organization that has this exceptional mission, right, which you could define in a number of ways, but is basically like, we're trying to steal state secrets from foreign governments. We're trying to, disrupt, spy on and disrupt terrorist attacks. We're writing this highly classified newspaper, the President's Daily Brief. We are recruiting assets. We are sending officers and assets into extremely dangerous situations. So you kind of have this very exceptional mission. And then at the same time, the whole place is a big public bureaucracy that behaves like a big public bureaucracy in many respects. And so you have this kind of mundane, reality to life at CIA that is paired with this exceptional mission. And A, I think that's great fodder for spy novels. But B, it's the reality of the place. And that to me as a very young analyst was shocking because, you know, you kind of come in thinking, you know, and I was 20 when I pulled in the door for the first time. So I'm kind of thinking stupidly that this place is going to be like, you know, it'd be like a Bourne movie or James Bond or something stupid like that. And it's not that, although there are elements of it that sort of, you know, resemble the superhero kind of spy fiction that's out there. So I think to me that sort of the tension between those two poles and that bipolarity was very surprising then, and I think continues to fascinate me today, even if I'm no longer surprised by it.
So how do you get into writing your characters? How do you get into the headset of, like, for instance, Procter? Like, how do you get into a female mindset?
Yeah, so this is a point of semantics, but I don't think I ever try to or think about it as getting into their mindset. I think I think about my job as hearing their voice and writing it down. And so it feels maybe more like a reporter to some degree, or like they're sitting there with me and they're kind of just telling their story and I'm writing it. And for me, I have not found a way to really do that process other than by trying to just write in the character's voice, right? And sometimes that is scenes for the book. You know, as I'm writing a first draft or something, I might get to know a character through just kind of starting to write their scenes. A few times I'll think about like almost a prompt, you know, what's something this person is deeply afraid of, or what is their greatest fear? What dilemma do they feel in their life right now as the story is starting? And I'll just kind of write the answer to that question in their voice. I know a lot of other writers do. I don't do, sort of biographies or anything like that. I feel like that seems too far out from the character's voice for my taste. So I just try to write extensively with the character. And again, you just use the analogy to human relationships. Like the way I've gotten to know good friends, the way I got to know my wife, the way I get to know my kids is by spending a lot of time with them, listening to them, talking to them, seeing how they behave in different situations. And I think getting to know a character is not so different from that.
And your dialogue, where does that come from? So you said when you hear her voice and stuff, or you hear voices and stuff, are you hearing voices? Or are you kind of going off a little deep or something? Or
I'm not actually hearing. I'm not hearing the voice. You know, although I would have a sense of like what their voice might sound like, but it's not like someone is speaking into my ear. But it is like I'm transposing it, right? Which is a kind of bizarre way to describe it, I guess. But when I'm really in that flow and I'm in a scene that's working and I've got characters who are talking and it's working, it feels like I almost can't write fast enough, you know, to catch up with the words that are coming out. Where they're coming from, I don't know. The muse, the universe, you know, it doesn't feel like it's from you. Let's put it that way. It doesn't feel like I'm creating it. It feels like I'm the one who's been charged with writing it down.
You drink a lot.
So I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, exactly. In addition to the audit mushrooms at the end of this, it's going to be a trip to AA. So this has been this podcast is going all kinds of dark places, and
we're here to bring you down.
There's lots more to come yet. We'll get you arrested before the show's over. Apart from Joe, obviously, who's been your inspiration? You know, when you've been reading novels and kind of over the years, who's been the kind of the one that did it for you? Well,
so I think in the spy genre, you know, it's been I think the two writers whose work with character and kind of prose I most respect are Le Carré and then Charles McCary, who I kind of see as the American, like, you know, the whole heir to Le Carré or blah 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 thing gets thrown around like so much, it's just absolutely insane and worthless. But I think McCary would be the closest thing we would have in an American context.
I had a feeling those names were coming.
I'm with you.
And McCary doesn't get the love that he's due, I think. Although, of course, you know, Spy fiction aficionados know who he is, but just in the popular consciousness, he hasn't captured it in the same way that Le Carré has. I was really inspired in particular by a lot of the early work of David Ignatius as a kid, in looking at the realism of those stories and the kind of insidery feel to them, which is, I think, one of the deeply satisfying ways the genre can work well. More recently, although I guess the books are about 10 plus years old, I think I just kind of stumbled upon Jason Matthews' Red Sparrow trilogy a bit by chance, and I started reading it actually in a period where I hadn't been reading much spy fiction because I was just coming out of the agency and kind of not excited about reading made-up stories about this business. And Jason, I think, very masterfully wove together these really compelling stories and also a lot of authentic stuff in there that made it feel, again, like, he was taking the place seriously, he was taking the tradecraft seriously, all that. So he was a big inspiration as well. I'll say that in recent years, I've tried to read more intentionally outside of the genre to see how other writers, and in particular, I've actually been reading some romance novels lately to see, like, how do romance authors deal with physical attraction between two characters, right? I mean, there's things like that you kind of look at and say, that's you might write about that in a spy novel, but, romance authors kind of do this for their bread and butter, some better than others. So I've been trying to read more widely. I think recently I've also been really enjoying Michael Chabon's books. I've been reading the Yiddish Policeman's Union, and have just found that it's very interesting to read books outside of your genre, but to kind of look at some basic things with how do they deal with establishing setting as a character, how do they deal with twists, a lot of psychological or kind of domestic thrillers, right, deal with psychological twists and things like that really effectively, or introducing characters and lulling the reader into thinking they know who they are and then they don't, So I try to be pretty omnivorous in what I consume these days.
Yeah, I like that approach. I'm looking at, I don't read horrors at all really because they're not really my thing, but I do like the concept of kind of terrifying the reader a little bit and keeping them on edge. So I'm trying to see if I can get some good recommendations down that genre to see if I can kind of learn a little bit from good writers.
I'll tell you on that one. So one that a horror. Now I also don't read much horror at all. I read Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House 2 or so years ago because I was working on some scenes, for my second novel, which is called Moscow X, and a bunch of that book takes place at this pretty gaudy, over the top, but also kind of creepy horse farm outside of St. Petersburg, Russia. And I was like, well, how do you convey some sense of kind of horror about a place, right? In a page you kind of think of as spy novels, like, you don't really do that frequently. But that book did an exceptional job in a very economical way of making you feel deeply afraid when they approach that house. So you might want to check it out. It's also not a very long book, but it's very psychological. It's not gory, which I think is more frightening. Shirley Jackson, Haunting of Hill House. Yeah.
Very
classic.
Yeah.
Classic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, and I think that's critical. People to mark off is read outside the genre.
Yes.
You have to. I mean, especially if you're starting a new genre. Like I went to something new, read something new. But I'm gonna back up and say Agents of Influence by David Ignatius was my muse book.
Yeah, that's a great one, isn't it?
It's just the one. Now that you have a following, you're a star, of course. How much do you think?
I don't know about
you're
that.
A star, you're a shining star on the CIA wall. No, you're not on the wall. Do you think about the readers over your shoulder? Are they there? The ones who've read your previous 3 books? You go, boy, I need to give them this. I need to give them that. Or is it just David writing and they like it? They can like it no matter what.
Well, this will sound terrible because God bless the readers, right? I mean, you need readers, right? The stories fail if they don't have
I've heard of that, yeah.
Right? Yeah. And the reader is to be respected, right? And dealt with honorably over the course of the book because they have other things they could have spent their money on or their, precious time on, right? So you have to some degree, I think in particular when it comes to craft, you have to think about the reader. But I will say that as I am working on the story, I don't think about the reader at all. I think about my nightstand and what I want on my nightstand. And I try to write that story. I hope that from that voice or from that authenticity comes something that is captivating to other people. So I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth because, you do have to think about the reader on questions like, have I made this story easy enough to get into so that I'll invite more readers in? Or, am I making the reader, am I being so obtuse that I'm making the reader sort of figure things out on the page in a way that is detracting from the experience of the story? So you got to think about the reader like that. But when I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about the characters that I'm discovering or the story that I want to tell, I really try not to think about the reader, and I just try to write something that I would be proud of having on my nightstand.
You don't want to know what's on my nightstand.
Yeah, or in the drawers next in the bed.
Yeah. Oh, boy. I tell you, that'd be terrible. But, but speaking of not thinking of the readers, with today's world, without getting into detail, there's so much stuff about Russia and all that everywhere you go, right? Do you ever think about that when you cover a book? Like you've got Russian arrives in Singapore, so you've kind of got this already involved. Is that a thing?
Yeah, it is a little bit. So I will say I generally try to pick. I think about it in terms of like the setting that I'm picking, and I try to pick a setting that I feel is fertile ground for a spy story, right? Which is going to discount some settings or maybe weight some above others. And I'll admit, so the fourth book that I'm just finishing writing now is an Israel-Iran story. And I went into it with some trepidation that I wouldn't be able, is the setting going to be so fluid that I'm going to struggle to kind of get grounding, right? To ground everything, because just so much is going on in the real world. So I've weighed that in my decision-making, sort of calculations. But I'll say typically I've just started with this frame of I want to be really interested in the setting. It should be relatively fertile ground for a spy story. And I'm never trying to get ahead of the headlines, or current events or to predict anything. That is too hard. I am trying to draw from authentic, things that have actually happened in, let's say, in the seventh floor, in the geopolitical contest between the United States and the Russians, even going back into the Cold War. I've tried to draw on real stuff to infuse the story with authenticity, not to predict where we're headed. That's just a personal choice. I'm sure other writers would do it differently, but for me, it's never been about can I sort of catch this? For me, it's okay, U.S.-Russia stuff. My book isn't going to come out for another year. I have no idea where U.S.-Russia, relations will be in a year's time or anything like that. And it's going to make a story much harder to write if I sort of try to predict that. So I'm just going to stick to crafting the setting in my novel, as authentically as possible and kind of starting from today and using recent history to build that world.
Right. I was thinking more about, perhaps it being a turnoff, because you say you're right. You want people, they're trying to escape from reality, or they get into your world that you're building and you're kind of telling a story, and it's to get them out of their own world, whatever that may be. Not necessarily bad, but just to get them into yours. I was thinking more, would it be a turnoff to kind of cover something that you hear every single day anytime you turn on news or social media? That's same as Israel, right? I mean, they're kind of subjects that not even about a side or what's right or wrong, any of that stuff. It's just stuff people are talking about all the time. That's what I was thinking more than.
Well, to that point then, that's a good one. For me, it's not boring because I feel like a lot of the discourse on these, or frankly, a lot of the way I might have approached or thought about Israel-Iran or our relationship with the Russians, if I'm just kind of consuming the news, even as an intelligent consumer, I'm not really under the hood to start thinking about how would individuals in this system interact with what's going on and think about it, right? And so I think that even if there's a lot of ink being spilled in the press right now about the Israeli-Iranian shadow war, like, for me as someone who likes to learn new things, it's actually a really interesting time to kind of dive even deeper into it and to think about how would I build an authentic fictional world under this kind of geopolitical netting to really bring it to life in a way that press reports, the news really can't. So in some ways, I'm actually more interested in it if it's getting a lot of airtime.
Sort of keeping sort of those two answers together. For the idea of authenticity, how do you deal with the good, bad, evil, patriotism conundrum? I saw Clancy speak after Red October, and he said, CIA people always be the good guys in his books. How do you deal with authenticity of the good, bad dynamic, the patriotism versus moral question?
I feel like, again, it comes from the individual characters that are in the book. Sort of their moral grounding, their ethical grounding frames, and frankly, their just position in the world, right? Frames the kind of moral choices that they make. I think, and this will kind of walk maybe along, or maybe this again is me talking out of both sides of my mouth, but I always had the impression in reading Le Carré's books in particular that he has this kind of rainy English mentality, and he's got this perspective that, sort of the spy game is inherently immoral or amoral, and that you're corrupted, ethically and morally by being involved in it, right? I mean, and that's a broad brushstroke to categorize, that canon with, but I think it's not so far off. I don't agree with that. I fundamentally think that most of the people who work in this business are highly ethical, honest people who also happen to, deceive some people for a living in order to get all of us the information that our government needs. And so I don't have this kind of, I don't come into the books trying to paint the CIA to be a villain or frankly anyone else. I'm trying to deal with the world kind of as it is. And I think that, I don't know if this has become certainly not something I set out to do intentionally as I write, but it's become a theme in my books, is I like to find people who have grown up in a different system, be it Syria or Russia or now in this, what I'm writing, in Israel and in Iran, and to think about how people who are, oftentimes not all good and all bad, right? Because I think almost all of us are double agents in some way. Think about how people respond in different systems, right? What's a Syrian intelligence officer who actually is, fundamentally a good person? What is he supposed to do in response to, protests and unrest that forces him to make really, immoral decisions, right? How does that work? And there aren't any clear answers to that question. There's a grayness to it for sure. But I think that kind of fundamental grayness or divide through our hearts, it just is a reality of human existence, and it's one that I really try to capture in my characters as I write every book.
I'm just looking at the titles of Seventh Floor, and I'm absolutely amazed that nobody has used that before with the relevance of Seventh Floor at Langley. Much better title than Corner Office. But with that in mind, you mentioned that you were working on a fourth book based in Israel and Iran. Can you give us a "you heard it here" moment? It came here first. Is there anything like a theme-wise that you can give us a little bit of a spoiler or a teaser for that fourth book?
Yeah, sure. So as I was trying to figure out how to dip into this, I got fascinated with the Israeli assassination campaigns against Iranian nuclear scientists, and it's of course been broadened in recent years. But going back about 15 plus years, the Israelis have managed to reach out and touch a lot of Iranians in what Meir Dagan, who's then the chief of Mossad, called divine interventions. And it showed this kind of, Israeli ability to operate inside Iran that was, pretty impressive. The pager incident more recently with Hezbollah has also demonstrated that carries over to other parts of, this sort of axis of resistance, quote unquote. And so for this book, I started with the kind of what if premise, which was, what if the Iranians had a similar capability, albeit at a smaller scale, inside Israel? And they started to kill and target Mossad officers who had been involved in those campaigns in the past. And it became the story about, kind of a war of assassinations between Israel and Iran, in which the Iranians are trying to kill the Israelis who have killed their friends, and the Israelis are trying to kill the Iranians who have killed their friends. So it is a cat and mouse between these two kind of small organizations, one in Mossad and one in the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, who are doing this killing. And, the characters that are the kind of, centerpieces of the book are trying to, are professional intelligence officers who have incredibly strong emotional feelings about what they're doing, who are, in most cases, fundamentally decent people, and who are caught up in this cycle of violence from which no one seems to be able to extract themselves. And to me, that's what the story has become, as I've written it. It's not quite done, but I don't fundamentally think anything I just said will change over the course of, finalizing some of my edits.
Well, it definitely sounds exciting. You'll have to email me a copy of that before it goes out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, what about the ending? Are you going to tell us the ending?
No, this one is, I will say, I think it's I'm hopeful that it is the biggest twist that I have managed to embed in one of my books. And I'm doing a few more rounds of edits to make sure I fully pulled it off, but I think it will leave people very surprised with how it comes out.
Well, let's see. So where do people find you? Do you like readers and stuff? Do you have like social media, website, lemonade stand? Like where do people
I do.
find
Yeah, the lemonade stand would be easier to manage than a lot of the social media stuff.
He steals the cash from his 3 kids are out there trying to sell them.
Yeah, exactly. My 7-year-old's maintaining the TikTok account these days. Yeah. I have a website. It's davidmccloskeybooks.com, so you can get more information on me and all the books there. I am across all of our various social media flavors, usually with the handle @McCloskeyBooks, so you can find me on Twitter/X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I have not migrated over to Blue Sky yet. I think I'm also on LinkedIn under my name. So you can find me pretty much anywhere. I'm trying to adapt to this brave, not even really new, but newish world that all of us authors are in, where we need to be active on social media. So you can find me there too.
Yeah, it helps a lot. We'll put all that up on our website too, and so people can find you easily. And we thank you. We've learned a lot. What can I say?
Well, thank you. Maybe I should I should withhold the thanks until I've confirmed I've not been audited out as a result of this podcast.
That's
but,
right.
I've enjoyed the conversation nonetheless, and really great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, David.
Well, thanks.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.